where there's a magician, he's on stage, he'll walk into a box or a door or something, and he'll appear on a different door. So watch, I'm gonna make our little magician. This is our magician, you see that?
Yeah.
Now watch this. Stand nowhere near you.
What's going on?
Just focus. So this is the magician entering box 1, right? On the stage, they go nowhere near each other.
Okay.
Just watch. Do you feel something? Just wait.
I do feel something.
You do? Look. It's vanished. And if it has worked, I went nowhere near you.
Oh! What the heck? Oh my god. Dude.
What the?
What is good, guys? It is Reed and welcome back to a sweet video. Today's going to be How to Make Your Magic Better, episode 11 on stating the obvious. Now, I haven't done a How to Make Your Magic Better video in a while, and that's mostly because I've had a bunch of other videos in the pipeline that I've been wanting to work on, but I think these videos are still super important and some of the most valuable videos that I make on this channel, so I really implore you guys to watch these and listen to them. Now, when you hear stating the obvious, you might not be too sure what I mean on that, and to be honest, I'm not exactly totally sure how this video is going to go as I'm sitting down here to film it. But one of the other reasons I was inspired to sit down and film this How to Make Your Magic Better video was just because some thoughts I've had on this topic about stating the obvious, and I will warn you, this might get a little bit controversial, and I am ready for the smoke in the comments that might come along with me saying this, but I do think it's important, and really I'm just trying to facilitate a discussion. This video is essentially going to be about the idea of stating the obvious when you're performing. Should you do it? When to do it? Should you not do it? Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? What is it? And that sort of thing, because I think I have some interesting takes on that, and some that I think you guys will find interesting, but some that I think are very valuable, and that's why I thought putting it in a How to Make Your Magic Better video would be great, because I do think this topic can greatly benefit your magic and your performance in particular. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you drop a like, whether you like it or not, please, that would help. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, and let's get into it. Let's start here. Let's start with what exactly do I mean, and what is it sort of stating the obvious, and what am I trying to get at? So to me, you hear this idea, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard it a lot in magic, of stating the obvious, stating everything you do when you're performing, right? So you might think of that performer who's clearly shuffling a deck of cards while he's performing, but he's telling the audience, I will now shuffle the deck of cards, now I'll give them a cut, now I'll deal 3 cards on the table. So you might think of that as one aspect. There's sort of several different aspects of this general topic that I think stating the obvious sort of covers to me. So that's one thing you might think of. You know, saying everything the audience can clearly see that is happening, right? You know, when you offer them to pick a card and they're picking a card, and for you to say, okay, you've picked a card, now you're putting the card back. Now here, you shuffle the cards, and you're reminding them that they're shuffling when they can clearly see and perhaps feel that going on. Another sort of part of this to me would be stating unnecessary elements of the effect. Well, I'm going to say unnecessary in quotes because we will get into if these are necessary or not in my mind. And what I might mean by this is saying, okay, I have a normal deck of cards, or saying you can see they're all different, or after they've selected a card and it was lost and you ask them, was that fair? Stuff like this, you know, again, reminding them that they shuffled the cards or you shuffled the cards. Stuff that is unnecessary because it's obvious to them, or in the aspect of a normal deck, you don't need to necessarily say that because it can just be assumed is sort of the thought process there. Or if you can convey that it's sort of a normal deck of cards, right? That's sort of the idea here. That is essentially what I'm getting at in terms of this concept of stating the obvious and what we're going to get into here. So why is this important, and why am I bringing it up in a How to Make Your Magic Better video? You know, this is quite different than a lot of the ones I've made in the past, which are specific elements of either performance or your sleight of hand that I'm explaining to you how you can take this one thing and practice and make it better. This is more of a a thought piece, and we will have a lot of tips in here and what I think you should be doing, but for now, why am I even bringing this up, right? So to me, it's to answer the question, what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad in magic, right? There's so many different opinions and thoughts, and at the end of the day, we're trying to find what is the best, what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. So I think this is a valuable thing to bring up for that discussion. I think that this discussion can and will improve your magic once we get into the meat of what my thoughts are on it and what sort of other people's thoughts are, and then some of the tips that I'm going to hope to give you. And it's the same thing with these videos. The tutorial videos, while they're all fun and great, I find you probably learn and have a lot more benefit from videos like this, where we're talking about the little more nuanced things. So I think little things like this are the small things that can make all the difference. So I do think it's important we have a discussion on it. Now I'm going to kind of circle back here to that first point of why I brought it up about the right and the wrong, or the good and the bad. We'll start to get into my thoughts, because my thoughts are there is no right and wrong. There's a time and place for everything at the end of the day, and there's no good or bad, there's no right and wrong. There's only people's opinions and experiences. Especially in an art form like magic, it's very difficult to say what's right and wrong, because it's just a series of people's opinions and experiences that are contributing to their thoughts on the subject. So I really don't believe there's a right or a wrong answer. I mean, can I really say that? Because I'm about to give you my opinion on what I think is right. So I suppose I do think there's a right answer in a certain context, but I'm not standing by what I'm saying as the golden rule like I feel like a lot of people are. I understand that there can be different circumstances for when different things are going to be better for different people and different times. I'm just going to try to give you why I think a lot of people have it backwards and why I think that is, and let you make your decision for yourself. But I think I have a fairly compelling case for my thoughts here. And that segues perfectly into the next part. I just think people have it wrong a lot of the time and have it backwards on this particular topic. So let's kind of get into that now. Let's get into the controversy and my thoughts on stating the obvious. So I think to start, we'll go look at the general consensus. I think the general consensus, if you're looking in the forums or here on YouTube or anywhere in the magic community, is that stating the obvious is a bad thing. It should never be done. There's no reason to do it. It's not necessary. But I'm gonna have to disagree with that. I genuinely think there's a time and place for this, and to be honest, it is the majority. Now you do have to be careful with it, and I think you should, before you get in the comments and blast me here, listen to why I think that is and what exactly I mean, because there are certain things that obviously you don't need to say, but there are a lot of things that people say, oh, you shouldn't say that I do think there is a time and place for. I'd like to start by examining a sort of contradiction, a bit of hypocrisy that I see, right? It's the idea that you have people who are sitting here saying, don't state the obvious. You should never say, oh, I'm shuffling the deck of cards while you're doing it. You should never say, this is a normal deck of cards and stuff like that. Some people don't even think showing the audience, before you start your performance, just that all the cards are different is even a good thing to do. And they say, oh, this is bad. You should never do this because it either raises suspicion or it's unnecessary and it just screams something's going on. But these same people are talking about how recapping is so important. And recapping, if you don't know, is the idea of usually right after most of the effect has passed, just before you reveal whatever the moment of magic is, you remind the audience of everything that has just transpired in the trick, such as they shuffled the cards, all the cards are different, it's a normal deck of cards, etc. And it's just funny because it's literally the thing you're saying not to do. It's fine if you do it just at the end, like at a slightly different moment, which it literally, if you think about it, doesn't make any difference, because people, regardless if those statements are really leading them to be suspicious, can be just as suspicious afterwards, perhaps even more so than before the trick when they haven't seen anything to happen yet. So I do think it's slightly hypocritical. Now, recapping to me is one of the greatest tools we have as magicians here. The way to create false memories and all these things, and that's why I think stating the obvious in that context is extremely important and wonderful. But even so, saying it before and during the trick I think can also be very important and very powerful, which I'll get into in a second. But you can see how there is a bit of a contradiction there, and regardless of when in the effect you say these obvious things, you can't really have one without the other. Now I know people are going to say, no, recapping is totally different. You're creating false memories, you are doing this, or maybe people are saying, oh, you shouldn't say those things when you're recapping. Well, I don't think that's right, and we'll kind of get into that more here, but some of these things are so important, especially in that final moment while you're building up those reveals to get the audience to understand why the effect is so impossible. So that's the first thing. It's just a bit of a contradiction, and again, we need to solve or get to the bottom of this contradiction and figure out why it exists, which we're going to get into now. So that's the first thing. Now, a big argument for why I think stating the obvious is important is recapping, like I kind of mentioned. When you get to the end, typically of an effect, or just before you do that final reveal where you show that it's their card, saying things like, you shuffled the cards are all different, you made every decision, you pulled out the card, you could have done anything. Even if some of those are slightly lies and we're utilizing false memories, these are some of the best techniques we have. We literally have the ability to manipulate people's memory, which is incredible. And the interesting thing is there's a reason this works. The reason this works is because people aren't as familiar with a deck of cards as we are as magicians, right? And what I mean by that is, I think best illustrated with an example. If I was doing some kind of effect for you and you're watching through the lens of a magician, and let's say, I don't know, I dealt 2 cards or something, and at the end of the effect I say, you remember, you dealt 2 cards on the table from wherever you want, or something like that. I'm trying to create this false memory. To you, there's no way you would ever buy it, because as a magician, you pay attention to those little nuanced details, such as the fact that I dealt the cards. You would remember that in the reconstruction process because you have a certain familiarity with this deck of cards that the layperson wouldn't have. And so with a layperson, I can actually get away with sometimes saying some of those statements as long as maybe they handled these 2 cards after they were dealt on the table. And so me saying, you dealt them, to them, even the word dealt, some people might not even fully comprehend what that word even means in the sense of a deck of cards. And I know it sounds like I'm calling people stupid, but I'm not. It's just a fact of people aren't familiar with this as an object. So the terminology and some of these things allow us to get away with these false memories. And the only reason that we really can get away with it is because of that lack of familiarity. Now, staying true to that hypothesis that the reason we can create these false memories and get away with it is because people are less familiar with a deck of cards, which I've shown you in the example is clear, that is the reason we can get away with it. And if we stay true to that, it also is telling us that people aren't going to be as understanding of some of the mechanics and things going on in the effect. The same way that a magician understands that if 10% of a trick fools them, they're absolutely fooled, whereas if an audience understands 10% of a trick, they feel like they know the whole thing, because they don't understand the nuance, the details. That's where that saying comes from, right? So in that same breath, their lack of comprehension, understanding of the nuance, the mechanics, and the workings of a deck of cards is the reason why we need to be obvious and have these obvious statements for them to truly understand how impossible or how incredible the effect is at the end of the day. It's literally the same thing that this recapping that we love so much, and these false memories that is one of the best tools we have. It's literally the reason it works. And because of that, it's just as powerful, just as strong, and just as useful to be able to say some of these obvious things to a person and have their experience of the effect enhanced. One thing I've said in other videos, and something I really live by with all of my effects when I'm trying to perform, is to convey the sense of astonishment that I know I would have to my audience, right? The reason, why do I think this trick is so good, so amazing? Even if I know how it works, even as a magician, I know why I think this trick is so amazing, and this is perfectly reflected in any card, any number, which we'll get to in a second. But why does this amaze me so much? And when I perform, I try my hardest to get that sense of amazement to the spectator and have them feel the same sense of amazement. And if you follow that philosophy, you will really be able to convey your effects better to the audience and get them to feel how you feel, and your reactions and the enjoyment of the audience will just go way up. And one of the best techniques for doing this is to kind of be obvious and state some more obvious things so that you can get them to understand the things that you understand when you're performing. So this is sort of my next point, which is we really want to convey that sense of astonishment, amazement, and possibility to our spectators. And stating the obvious, stating some of these things that seem more obvious to us, which honestly are not as obvious to them. I think we're stuck thinking like magicians, and we think, oh, this is so obvious that shuffling a deck of cards is mixing the cards. And again, like, I get that might sound like I'm saying someone's stupid if they don't understand that, but it's not. It's just helping them to truly process that in their mind, that is relevant. Because think about how much weight we put on, can a deck of cards be shuffled by the spectator when we're critiquing effects, right? When we see a new effect, there's so much weight in whether the spectator can shuffle a deck of cards. It can take the trick from here to here if they can, depending on the effect, right? So it's obviously extremely important whether they shuffled or not, so why wouldn't we highlight that as a moment when performing? There's literally nothing wrong with highlighting that, because as it's something we put so much weight on for a reason, because it takes the impossibility up from here to here. And it's not that they don't understand that them shuffling changed the order of the deck of cards. That's not what I'm saying. It's about getting them to really process that information. So instead of just them saying, okay, I shuffled the deck, but what does that mean? What does it mean that I shuffled the deck of cards? How does that affect the impossibility of what I just saw? How can that elevate what I just saw? It's our job to be able to get them to make that link from what just happened and how does that make it better, and saying it, and it just giving it to them on a silver platter, serving it to them, explaining it to them, is the easiest way for us to connect those dots. And so even though it seems obvious to us, getting them to make that conclusion, right, is what's really important. It's not getting them to understand that they shuffled the cards, it's getting them to understand what that actually does and how that improves the effect. That's why I say we need to get them to feel the same amount of astonishment as we do. To understand this point, you just need to understand that, like I've been saying, we are much more familiar with a deck of cards than they are. They are less familiar, and so we need to help them make that link from what has happened to why it makes the effect more powerful. And we don't necessarily need to explain, like if we have, for example, them shuffling is what happened, and then why it makes the trick better is because the cards are all mixed, and obviously there's no way that I could know the order of the deck, there's no way that there could be any key cards, all these things that as a magician I'm thinking of. How do we link those two together so that they understand that them not shuffling means that none of these things can happen? And obviously you don't want to say, well, now that you've shuffled the cards, they're completely different, so I can't be using any key cards, I can't have a stack, right? You've ruined my stack. Obviously you're not going to say stuff like that. And that would be the part of stating the obvious that is too obvious, or the wrong thing to do, would be stating things that, one, they don't even understand, and that would actually hinder magic and your other techniques and stuff. So what you need to do is just say something that's obvious enough to link those two together and get them to understand. It's as simple as, you shuffled the cards, so now they're in a completely different order that no one could ever know. Right? Just something simple like that totally puts in context of how impossible this trick now becomes because of them having shuffled the deck. So it's really a clarity thing at the end of the day. It's to make our effects clear, right? You never know who you're performing for, what their it's not even cognitive ability, but it's just the way they think. How their brain processes information, because they could take something you say and their brain could just interpret it as not important, and it'll go in one ear and out the other. Where someone else might get stuck on this little nuanced detail, and either one of those situations can ruin your effect. So it's better to just lay it all out there so that no matter what kind of thinker they are, they'll be able to follow you along in this effect and understand why it's so powerful. So hopefully after that you can kind of start to see why I think sort of stating the obvious in this way is really important. Why I do think people actually kind of get it wrong in the you should never do it, and why it's not important, when I actually in fact do think it is quite important, and to try and sort of solve the contradiction that I talked about at the beginning of the video. Now, how to do it properly. Really, I think the biggest tip here is to make them understand your perspective. Like I've been saying, you want them to get every element of the trick from your perspective, right? If you think of that sort of childlike amazement that you have when you used to first see magic and you didn't know how it was done and what got you hooked, we want them to have those same kind of feelings. So how can we convey that best to them? It's important we don't make them feel dumb. And I do agree with this sentiment, right? Stating the obvious, we don't want them to feel dumb, but what people think, saying you shuffled the cards, I shuffled the cards, you cut the cards wherever you want, that's not making them feel dumb. That's just helping them with clarity. That's not going to make them feel dumb, because that might make a magician feel dumb, but it won't make a layperson feel dumb because of that lack of familiarity that I mentioned, right? If you help them connect the bridge, make the bridge to those two things, it won't make them feel dumb. If you just tell them something they don't understand, that might, right? But it's about making them not feel dumb, but rather feel amazed. Another thing to do this properly is be sparing with it, though. There's a time and a place, like I say. If you're doing several card effects back to back that all use a shuffled deck of cards, you only need to say the first time, you shuffled the cards, that, the order's completely different, no one could ever know. The next time you just could emphasize maybe a little bit that they are shuffling the cards at this moment, so they'll remember that they did in fact shuffle the cards, right? And you point it out as an emphasis. We're just emphasizing things that they would otherwise forget, right? Like I said, it's the same way we can use not emphasizing things to make them forget them and instill false memories, is the same reason we kind of want to, in fact, point out obvious things to them so that they remember and don't forget these things that, they would normally not put emphasis on and forget, but are actually important to the amazement or the astonishment a factor that they'll have at the end of the effect. You can use slightly different lines. You don't obviously want to be a robot and say the exact same thing every single effect, and, but just stating some of these basic things that are simple, you shuffled the deck, you mix the cards, just slight changes in your language. That's when you could start to make them feel dumb. If you've done 3 effects in a row and every time you say, remember you shuffled like 10 times throughout the effect, right? And I think some examples that I'll get into in a minute will probably help illustrate exactly how to use these ideas sort of properly. A great way to use this properly is, like I mentioned before, just recapping just before you do your reveal, or just at the end of the effect, you establish the important things that have happened in the effect that make it so incredible, the things that they might otherwise forget, things that take the effect to the next level, and if you want to try to create some false memories. Now, some examples. I think the best example here is going to be an any card, any number. And I kind of talked about this theory before, but a lot of magicians think that the any card, any number sucks as an effect and it's boring, and I think that's true because a lot of magicians don't do it well. And part of that reason is because they try to avoid what I'm talking about in this video, explaining to people why it's such a good effect. And you don't want to come out verbatim and just say why it's so good, but you want to convey that feeling that you have. Us as magicians, we love any card, any number. Why do we love it? Try to convey that feeling of love that you have for the effect to them. Now, if I look at myself, the reason I enjoy it is because it's such an impossible feeling, because we understand that if you can do one that works, you'll be able to do it every time. So it's not just a 1 in 52 chance. It's a 1 in 52 times every single time you've ever done this effect, which we would assume has been, infinitely. You can always do it. So it just becomes an astronomically incredible feat. And so stuff like that. We understand that if the cards are shuffled, it makes this astronomically more difficult than if they're not shuffled by, the spectator, say. We understand that if any card or any number is truly named, it makes this effect much more difficult. Just from a methodological standpoint, we understand this and we want to convey this to them, because, again, if you don't say any of this and they just name a number, name a card, you deal down to that number, it's not that exciting because they don't understand how hard, how impossible this is to actually pull off. And so your job, like I keep saying, is to make them feel the same way that you feel watching this. So how would you do that? It depends obviously on the method you use, but let's use my Soe can, for example, right? What I would do is, at the beginning, when they are shuffling that deck of cards, I emphasize that. So I give them a deck, I say, you shuffle. And while they're shuffling, I just, it's part of the pattern, part of making conversation. I say, look, you're shuffling these cards, you're making the order completely different so no one could ever know this order. And just, you can even have them say agreed and agree with you, right? So that's the first moment of getting them to understand that this deck is in a completely random order, which is obviously very important for this type of effect. Now when you get the deck back and you say, I want you to really think about this, you can name any card you want, any one at all, name any card, and they do. This is important to make them really understand that the element of free choice, right? They're just naming it. So now I go through, I get control of that card, and I go into the palm, and in the pattern I'm using the memory demonstration or whatever I happen to be using. When I hand them the deck for the second shuffle, again, I don't need to remind them that, hey, it's making the deck completely different, everything like that, but I just emphasize this moment as another moment they've shuffled while their card is supposedly in the deck, even though I've palmed it out, right? They're shuffling, I just say, remember, you're shuffling the cards, or you don't even have to, you can just give the deck out to here, you shuffle them one more time just to make sure they're completely mixed. Now they hand the deck back, I do the load, and I instantly hand it back to them, and I say, you shuffled the cards, I just emphasize just a little bit at this moment too, so that they know that that deck in their hands is completely shuffled. And I say, I want you to think of any number between 1 and 52, and you don't even have to say it out loud, just deal that number of cards into my hand. They go through, they deal it, and then I say, look, I do the shift, you could have done any one of these cards, you could have said any number, and this is the moment when the recapping will come along. I say, look, you shuffled the cards, the deck could be in any order. You named absolutely any card you want, completely free choice. You chose a number, you never even said it out loud, and instantly after you shuffled, you dealt down this number of cards into my hands. I won't do anything, I won't even touch the card. What was your card again? They'll say the card, and they'll flip it over and reveal the card. So you can see how me saying those little moments of you shuffled, and you could have named any number, during the middle of the effect, now when I recap and call back to those moments, in their mind, that's bridging the gap. And now the false memories are much stronger because when it was happening, I emphasized that it was happening, and they can clearly think back to those moments. And so when we get to the end of the effect and I'm recapping, and the only false memory I have to really get them to remember is that I did touch the cards for a second after they shuffled and instantly handed it back to them. And I don't emphasize that moment, but I emphasize just before when they were shuffling and just after when they thought of a card right away. So I am stating obvious things during the effect, but we make the effect so strong. And also too, at the end, just before the reveal, I say things like, you could have picked any card, and then you thought of any number, and if you would have thought of any other card or any other number, this would not have worked. And the chances of this working are incredibly slim, the fact that you would name the exact card and the exact number. Now I'm giving them that frame of reference that we already have about the effect, and now they understand sort of the level of impossibility. So in an ACAN especially, I think it's so important that you convey to them everything that you can, that is, fairness, impossibility, and then at the end make sure you emphasize how impossible it would be to get that card and that number at that position. And I would never say, it's a 1 in 52 chance. I would try to push that, by just saying, you'd have to get the card perfect and the number perfect. Really, you're only having to get one of those, but audiences aren't going to think too critically about that, and you can make it feel like a much more impossible effect. Another example would be like 2-card Monty, right? If you've seen my 2-card Monty tutorial, if not, go check that out. But you have really 4 cards in play. They think it's only 2, but you're switching face down. Ace of spades, ace of clubs, ace of spades. If you didn't state the obvious, right? If you were just like, okay, I'm going to put the ace of spades here, and I want you to follow it. And then you just did this. Like, yes, they're not stupid. Yes, they can follow it. But there's a couple of issues, right? You could run into that situation. Maybe they look away for a second. There's a lot of commotion when you're performing. Or someone just does forget. It's going to happen. It's important that we want to have that clarity where they are following the movements. And we're saying, even though it's obvious, we're switching them. We're saying, okay, look, I'm going to switch this card. So now I'm holding the ace of spades. I'll switch it again, so now you're holding the ace of spades again. Here, look, take a look, you can check, it's still the ace of spades, right? Those are so important in an effect like that because when you hit them with the kicker when they've changed to kings, you need them to be fully convinced that it was the aces the whole time. And if you're just, again, it's just enhancing the effect. It's not actually taking away, it's not making them feel dumb. In fact, you're helping them. And it's important, when you're performing, you want to have these sort of safety nets up, and one of those things would be to be saying where the card is while you're switching it, so that you don't run into the situation where they actually just have no idea. So then when they have no idea, like if I just said where's the ace of spades, and you obviously have no idea, so when I show you that it's over here, that's not an effect. But if you were convinced that it was here and then it switched positions, it becomes something a little bit more impressive. So I think that's an example of, stating the obvious in a different context, but how it's actually so important. And another thing would be the trick I do, a torn and restored, you guys have probably seen. I'll link a clip of it in one of my street magic videos where I take 2 cards, put them back to back, rip them in half, put them in the spectator's hands, and then half of each card restores together. So it'd be like half the 2 and half the king are restored, and half the 2 and half the king are restored in the other person's hand, and both cards can be signed, everything. It's a great effect. Now, something like that is a case where I wouldn't have to say anything. The effect is clear from the visuals, right? I could just take 2 cards, have them sign it, rip it, hand them, and then the 2 halves of the cards restore, which is incredible. And I don't have to be obvious with that, but it still helps to. And I know this for a fact because I've had people recount this effect incorrectly, right? And it's the same idea when you ask someone to recount an effect you've done. It's the same reason laymen can never recount it properly. They always leave things out, they always miss things because they're just not as familiar with a deck of cards, so they don't know what to look for, that sort of thing. So they'll say, oh, he took a card and he just ripped 2 cards and they came back together and it was amazing. But they don't even mention the signature. They don't even mention that it was a free choice. They chose whatever cards they want. They don't even mention that I showed the cards separate, because if I just took 2 cards out and had them back to back the whole time, well, that screams maybe a gimmick or something. But I show the cards apart from each other like this. They forget those little things that are super important, and so it's important to emphasize those things for them to enhance the amazement in the effect, right? So when I do it, it'll just be, say stop wherever you'd like. They pick the 2 cards, and I'll usually even say, once they've signed it, I'll say, look, remember this moment. You can see the 2 cards apart. At the end, just before the restoration happens, I'll say, look, you picked any card. You saw the card was whole together. You signed it, so it had to be whole. There's no way anything, and it sounds obvious to us, but to them, it's not as obvious, and it just enhances the effect. Now, there is an art form to this. You don't need to say like you signed it so it's whole, so that means that there's no way that it could not be whole and be in 2 pieces, which means that there's no way it could have been pre-made into some sort of gimmick beforehand, where I was sat at home and I spent a few hours creating this gimmick just to do this trick. There's no way that could be right. Like, obviously there's that is too obvious. There's an extent and there's an art to this where you're subtly saying things and just getting them to connect that bridge, and that's really where the art comes to. So now, how to improve at this, how to get better. Well, I think you should rewatch this video if you need, but just reflect on what I've said, reflect on what you think is important. Take away what you will from what I've said and work on that. See what works for you, see what gets the best reactions and gives the best experiences, right? I think our opinions are formed from our experiences, and our experiences are the best way to grow and learn. So try different things I've talked about. Try, maybe stating the obvious, maybe not, and see where you get the better reaction. I'm confident that, conveying this message to your audience will get you a better reaction. But, try what works for you and do it that way. Like I said, these are my thoughts, and hopefully I've laid out a valid argument that you can understand. But regardless, see what works for you. And at the end of the day, my biggest tip is just to try to make the audience feel the way you do about magic, that sort of childlike love for magic that you had, and I think you'll be off to a great start. Just be subtle with some of the things you say. If you want to convey that the cards are shuffled in a completely different order, you just be subtle. You say, remember, you shuffled the cards in an order no one could ever know. You don't need to say, oh, so now there's no way that I could know that what the order is, and you've ruined my stack, and right, like, just be subtle with it, be smart about it. So I'm gonna end this video here. I think this video turned out awesome. Just after having sit down to film it here, I think I really conveyed the message I was trying to properly. So sometimes you sit down in front of a camera and it's tricky and you don't know if it's gonna turn out exactly how you plan. So I'm really glad. Turned out really awesome. So I hope you guys got some value from this video. For those of you who made it this far, I thank you for sticking around, and drop me a comment if you made it this far. Let me know what your thoughts are on this topic. It's definitely interesting, probably a bit controversial, but I think it's a great one, a great discussion piece nonetheless. Now, if you'd like some more lessons on magic theory or your sleight of hand or mentalism or anything like that, send me an email, rfsleights@gmail.com. We can get a private lesson going. I would love to help you out, so if you need that, send me an email. And to everyone who has subscribed, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. You don't even know. So with all that said, guys, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video.